All right, we'll get this started in just a few seconds. I am setting us up to go live on Facebook. All right, and I believe we were all set. So thank you all for joining us for this important press conference. I'm going to go ahead and let the Congresswoman take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm honored to be surrounded by very good friends, colleagues, champions for gun safety as we announce the Firearms Retailer Code of Conduct Act. This morning, you're going to hear from Kris Brown, the president of the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, Fred Gutenberg, founder for Orange Ribbons for Gun Safety, and someone that I call a dear friend. He also lost his daughter, Jamie, at the Parkland shooting. Romania Dukes, founder of Mothers Fighting for Justice, one of my constituents, someone that also has become a very good friend and who lost a child to gun violence. Patricia and Manny Oliveira, founders of Change the Ref. They lost their son at the Parkland shooting. And Isabella Delacio with March for Our Lives. I know that everyone on this call has been working for years diligently to prevent the pain of gun violence, the bloodshed of gun violence, and we're not going to rest until our job is done. Gun violence and its tragedies continue to plague our nation. It doesn't stop because of a pandemic. And what we know is that gun violence is not only limited to schools, to concerts or clubs. It happens every single day in our cities and our towns, on street corners. Over 100,000 Americans are shot every year. On average, over 100 people die every single day from gun violence, and over 37,000 every year. The sad reality is that gun violence is part of our daily life for thousands of people. Communities of color disproportionately suffer the pain and the consequences of gun violence. They bear the weight of our policy failures. Data shows that 89% of all gun homicides occur in urban communities, and 73% of all gun homicide victims are either Hispanic or Black. Nationally, Hispanic Americans are nearly twice as likely than white Americans to die from gun homicide. And Black Americans are 10 times as likely as white Americans. I represent a district which is a majority minority district. And I have heard the stories of community-based gun violence and the heartbreak that it causes. Just ask Romania Dukes. I get calls every day from constituents, from people that I know, asking me, what are we doing to prevent one more child from losing their life to this epidemic? The guns in our communities don't just appear out of thin air. They often start as guns sold at a gun store by a gun dealer. After a sale, they're illegally trafficked into our cities by and for people who would otherwise fail a background check. Straw purchases, for example, where a buyer purchases a gun on behalf of another, are the most common starting point for trafficked firearms. Gun dealers are the last line of defense in identifying and stopping these fraudulent purchases. They have most of the information in front of them to assess the situation, to see if the sale is suspicious. But shockingly, under federal law, there is no requirement to complete any type of training to become a federally licensed dealer and to sell a gun. This bill works to change that. It works to prevent gun trafficking and hold gun dealers and their employees accountable. The Firearms Retailer Code of Conduct Act creates a training and a certification program that all federally licensed gun dealers and their employees must complete to sell a gun. The Attorney General and the Department of Justice will develop this training program, and it will give gun dealers the tools they need to recognize fraudulent sales, like straw purchases, and identify people that may cause them harm. With these tools and training, gun dealers will be equipped to recognize and stop gun trafficking, and my bill holds them accountable to follow through. It makes it illegal for gun dealers and their employees to sell a gun to someone if they know or should know that a person is making a straw purchase, is going to hurt someone, or is intoxicated. In fact, my bill places criminal penalties on dealers for not staying current on their training or when they make a prohibited sale. This is a common sense bill that aims to make real reforms to the ways that guns are sold. And most importantly, this bill keeps guns off our streets and out of our communities. Gun dealers are the last line of defense, and my legislation will hold them responsible. I've been working closely on this bill with the Brady organization. I'm so grateful for their leadership and commitment to preventing gun violence. And I'd like to introduce Kris Brown, president of the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, for some brief remarks. After Kris says a few remarks, I'll say some remarks in Spanish as well. Kris?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and thank you so much for your leadership on this critically important issue. I'm so proud to see this bill introduced today because, of course, I lead the organization that was founded by Jim and Sarah Brady that over a quarter century ago created our nation's background check system, which has been a resounding success. Perhaps that's why more than 90% of Americans across this country support the background check system as the basic line of defense to ensure that guns are sold to responsible gun owners. The issue that this bill is addressing is one that is so critically important because even the ATF, the agency charged with inspecting and managing gun dealers across this country, acknowledges that gun dealers are the last line of defense in this country before a gun is sold either into the legal market or into the criminal market. That's where it happens. And ultimately, what this bill is doing is codifying common sense. If I were to go to a dinner party, and I know because I do this, and ask questions of folks who are there, regular Americans, and ask them, do you think there is required training for people selling guns in this country to determine whether the person purchasing the gun is purchasing it unlawfully? They would say, I'm sure, everyone I've asked, yes, of course, we must do that. We don't. We don't mandate it. We don't require it. What ATF says is, we think it's a good idea and it's voluntary. Whether the gun dealers across this country, and keep in mind, we have more gun dealers in this country than we have Starbucks and McDonald's combined. The result of our inaction around these issues and not having an appropriate duty of care associated with how guns are sold by these gun dealers results every single day in crime guns being sold. And the impact of those crime guns is predominantly felt, as the Congresswoman noted, in communities of color. 90% of homicides across this country impact communities of color. Black men in this country have on average 4 years less life expectancy due solely to the issue of gun violence. Gun violence is killing particularly Black youth at a higher rate between the ages of 18 to 35 than any other leading cause of death. And crime guns are the reason for that. So ultimately, we believe that the essence of this bill will provide needed security, protections, and safeguards to every single American across this country. And I just want to close with this one point. Brady has been around for a long time. We work across Congress, courts, and communities to end the epidemic of gun violence. One of the things I'm proudest of is our legal work. We've been litigating on behalf of victims in courts for 30 years. We've achieved $60 million in judgments, primarily against gun dealers. Better than that is the injunctive relief that we've been able to make on behalf of victims. But you know what makes me really sad about that? It's after the fact. It's after someone has been killed in a kind of case that I'm going to give you an example of. Janet Delana in Missouri had a schizophrenic daughter. She had delusions. And sometimes she was a threat to herself, and sometimes she was a threat to her family. Her daughter ideated about the idea of killing her father with a gun. So Janet went to the only gun store in her small town, and she talked to the dealer, and she asked that dealer, please, if my daughter walks into the store, she has mental health issues, please do not sell her the gun. And he refused to agree not to sell her the gun. 2 days later, Janet's daughter walked into that store. She bought that gun. She drove back to her home and she shot her father dead. Janet Delana lost her husband and she lost her daughter, who was committed to a mental institution. All because the dealer, when we deposed him, admitted, yes, she asked me to sell the gun. Yes, I understood what I was being asked. When we asked, why didn't you? He said, there's no law preventing me from doing that. So thank you, Congresswoman, for introducing this bill and making that law. You will make a difference and you will save lives. It's a pleasure to be here, also with all of the other wonderful speakers and incredible advocates that you have assembled today. So thank you.
Thank you, Kris. That is such a painful story to hear, but we hear these stories over and over and over again, and it's just completely unacceptable that we're not taking action. Me gustaría decir unas palabras en español. Estamos aquí reunidos porque la violencia armada y las tragedias que éstas generan continúan aserrando a nuestro país. Ni siquiera durante una pandemia esta violencia se detiene. Nuestras comunidades de minorías, nuestras comunidades hispanas y afroamericanas sufren a niveles desproporcionados el dolor y las consecuencias de la violencia armada. Ellos son los que tienen que aguantar las fallas políticas. En mi distrito, yo escucho muchas historias de muertes con armas de fuego en la comunidad y la angustia que esto causa a las familias. Solo le pueden escuchar ahora a Romania Dukes, que va a contar esa historia. Las armas en nuestras comunidades no aparecen de la nada. A menudo comienzan como armas vendidas en una tienda de armas por un comerciante de armas. La realidad es que los comerciantes de armas son la última línea de defensa para identificar y detener estas compras. La Ley de Conducta de Comerciantes de Armas de Fuego crea un programa de entrenamiento y certificación para que todos los comerciantes de armas con licencia federal y sus empleados tengan ese entrenamiento. La tuvieran que completar cada 2 años para poder volver a vender esas armas. El fiscal general y el Departamento de Justicia desarrollarán este programa de entrenamiento y brindarán a los comerciantes de armas las herramientas que necesitan para reconocer las ventas fraudulentas, como las compras falsas, y para identificar a las personas que pueden causar daños. Con estos recursos, los comerciantes de armas estarán mejor preparados para reconocer y detener el tráfico de armas. Este proyecto de ley, que yo he estado trabajando con el Brady Campaign por muchos meses, los hace responsables también a ellos para poder partir de este momento. Right now, I would like to now introduce my good friend, Fred. You know, we've connected at so many levels. This has been a personal issue for me, and because I lost my dad to gun violence. And I met Fred right after the Parkland shooting, and I met Fred and many, many other parents. I remember going a week after the shooting up to Parkland. And let me just say that Fred has used the pain that this shooting caused by losing his daughter to really bringing up his voice and bringing light to the issue of gun violence. He has come numerous times to Washington. He has sat there along with Patricia and Manny Oliveira in front of the Judiciary Committee hearings, just making sure that we do the right thing for them, for their families, but for thousands and thousands of families that have been affected by gun violence in America. One of the things that I want to mention is that next week I'm also going to be introducing the Partners Act, which is a bill that's going to create a one-stop phone line for easily accessible mental health support. One of the things that we don't talk enough about is that the survivors of gun violence, whether you lost a loved one or you were there present during some sort of shooting, are left behind, and there are no support services. So I've been advocating and working on legislation that will provide support for survivors of gun violence. And now I'd like to introduce Fred.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and my dear friend, and to my other friends on this call. You know, to call what has happened in this country over the past few days weird, frightening, would be an understatement. We have an occupant in the White House who tells us all the Second Amendment is under attack, who defends a 17-year-old killer running around with the intention of conflict when somebody dies. And I start off my comments that way because I do want to just say how thankful I am for people like you, Congresswoman, and like you, Kris, at Brady, for always stepping up to save lives. Because the BS of the Second Amendment being under attack is just that. It's BS. The work that we do has no affront to the Second Amendment, but it is about saving lives. It's about stopping this preventable and predictable gun violence outcome, the exact type of situation you described, Kris. Or the kid who killed my child and Manny's child, we could have stopped it had different laws been in place. This 17-year-old who showed up this week with his mother, by the way, had we had different laws in place, we could have stopped it. The idea that we should sit around and do nothing to protect life is simply not an option for me or anyone else on this call. And we're going to go through the next few months where, sadly, in a very predictable way, we're going to see more examples of preventable gun violence that with different laws, we could have stopped. And we're going to watch them happen. Partly because this administration unleashed a gun surge on America carried out through gun dealers. You know, we saw it happen in front of our very own eyes. And now we're going to see the outcome of that. And so I just want to say, Congresswoman, this bill is important. You know, Manny and I always talk about the challenge of holding people accountable after you and your family have been victims of gun violence. It's a really tough thing to do. This bill gives tools to hold people accountable. And for that, I thank you, and I will work with you every which way to ensure we get this passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you so much. I wouldn't be able to do it without all of you. And the Brady, I mean, let me just say, they've been relentless in working with us to get this piece of legislation introduced. Now, Romania, if she doesn't need a whole lot of introduction, she has been a champion here in my community. And now most of Florida knows who Romania Dukes is. Mothers fighting for justice. Romania.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for having me. I want to start by saying I live in the community of South Dade, of Goulds, Perrine, Homestead, Florida City, and the gun violence is real. When I mean by real, it's everyday gun violence, everyday killing in my community. And with this bill, I support it 100% because it could stop these kids from going to these back stores, these pawn shops, meeting people at the gun show in the parking lot buying these illegal guns. It's a shame that we and our seniors have to deal with the gun violence every day. I'm so afraid of my aunt. She lives in a senior living. And now this week I'm gonna start awareness check for those seniors where I would go by and check and see how they doing because they right in the middle and the side of the gun shed. They can't sit on their porch. They can't do anything. They can't walk to their cars. They can't walk to the store. They can't walk in the van to go to the hospital because of the gun violence and the shooting that's going on. So yes, I support this bill. I dealt with it since 2014 when I lost my son to Michael Dukes. July 21st, right in front of me. He was sitting in a chair, him and his sister and some more friends, fired stray bullet. When the gunshots was fired, my kids got up to run, and that first stray bullet shot my son in the chest. And every time I hear of a shooting, it just brings back those memories, something that we'll never forget. There's no expiration date for our pain. And I just have to deal with it. I get phone calls every day from mothers and fathers. How can I help them? How can we help them? And the answer is our community has to come together. We have to stick together. Our justice come with, where I'm from, the justice come from our community. If you see something, say something. You just can't hold all this information in. We losing babies. The youngest was 2 years old, shot in the chest, just like my son riding on his scooter. So this bill will help a lot, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for what you're doing and what you're trying to do. And I support you. Thank you.
Thank you, Romania. Isabella Delasio, who has been a very active voice in the movement of providing common sense gun reform to keep our communities safe. Thank you for your activism. Thank you for representing March for Our Lives today. Isabella, if you want to say a few words.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Bella Delasio, and I'm the Federal Policy Associate for March for Our Lives. I'm from Broward County, Florida, a state plagued by gun violence. Growing up in South Florida, I consistently saw people dying in my community, but it was something that was so common, I had become completely desensitized to it. Firearms played such a massive role in suicides, homicides, domestic violence, and urban violence. Yet to me, it was so normal that I thought nothing of it. According to the most recent 10 years of CDC data, 89% of all gun homicides occur in communities of color, and 73% of all gun homicide victims are Hispanic or Black. I grew up in a community that embodies that statistic. To the rest of the world, Miami is known as the Magic City. Yet beneath the layers of mystique and deception, it is anything but magical. My grandparents lived there, and naturally, as in any other Cuban household, I spent a substantial amount of my childhood at their house. My grandfather built his home from the ground up, personally laying down the foundations of what would become a safe haven for our family. Looking back on it, I'm certain that we thought of Abuelo's home as our safe haven because of the giant gate he built around the home, a gate built to protect us from crime in the Magic City. As a daughter of Cuban immigrants, I find it sad that we and many other immigrants come to this country seeking the American dream, only to be lost to senseless gun violence. I should not have to constantly be cautious of my surroundings. I should not have to constantly live in fear and anxiety for my life and the lives of my loved ones. Gun violence is the reality of America. We will not sit here and witness the chapters of our future burn. I am proud to be here today to support this legislation that focuses on proactive and preventative solutions to gun violence, solutions that can actually make an impact on my future. The guns that appear in communities like mine don't just appear out of thin air. They are sold by gun dealers at a store, and then they are trafficked into our cities illegally. It is imperative for us to support this legislation because gun dealers are our last line of defense. Passing this bill would give them the tools they need to stop trafficking, and it would hold them accountable for all the lives that can be lost from irresponsible sales. To Congress, I urge you to pass this legislation. With it, we can save the lives of our loved ones. With it, we can save the future of America. My name is Bella Delasio, and I'm 20 years old, and we are the generation that has grown up in the era of gun violence, but we are also the generation that will end it.
Thank you, Isabella. I can't help but get a little emotional listening to you because you give me so much hope. And now it's my pleasure to also introduce Manny Oliveira, who lost his son, Joaquin, also at the Parkland shooting. And Manny and his family, Patricia, his wife, Patricia, they established Change the Ref, an organization to bring awareness to the epidemic of gun violence. Again, like Fred, they've used their pain and their frustration on the inaction at the federal level to really get a movement going around this epidemic that we see in our nation. Manuel, I want everyone, if you can, if you're listening, to go to changetheref.org and get involved, because they have used the power of art also to communicate that pain and also to bring others and bring awareness to the issue. So, Manny, thank you for joining me. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Debbie. It's a pleasure being here this morning and with friends. They're also part of this panel, brothers, I will say, in Fred's case. It's tragedy brought us together, but we are finding ways to have hope in each other and in many other people like you guys. This is like an one-of-a-time opportunity for me to say something that I never thought I was going to say. Like, I want to work together with gun dealers, right? I'm going to help you to move on and have your business in a safer place. So I'm going to breathe for a minute and not bring out the real issue that has me here, which is losing my son inside his school after someone brought legally an AR-15. So I'm going to put all that on the side and bring, like you said at the beginning, a common sense bill that will only benefit all of us. I also want to bring the fact that it's so ironic that our community, Latino communities, in case you don't know, I'm Latino, maybe you got it from my accent, but just in case, and Black communities are suffering this in a very higher way than other communities. And the ironic side of it is that we are the same ones that were called criminals and traffickers. And we were like target as the problem. And we are not the problem. We are suffering from this problem. So this is a chance to have new faces sending the message that we are sending right now. I've seen Kris' face, Fred, Romania, Isabella, and you. This is a chance for more people to get involved. This is a chance to agree with each other. There is no discussion in here. There shouldn't be an argument here. This is the real deal. It's a win-win-win situation. Win in quotes, because we will never win. I'm talking about the ones that are giving their testimony right now. Romania, Fred, myself, and yourself. We already lost by losing our loved ones. So everything that we do here is for other people to win this battle. I love when Romania said that if you see something, say something. Don't tell me that you don't see something, because we see more than something every single day. Just go on social media or your TV and watch the news and you see something. We all see something very bad happening. So now that we agree that we see something, let's just go ahead and say something with that same power. I do want to say in Spanish the numbers that I mentioned before. Es inconcebible, una ironía y una falta absoluta de parte nuestra que no apoyemos una moción como esta. ¿Por qué? Porque nosotros que fuimos tildados de traficantes, de asesinos, de bad hombres, I don't know where that came from, but that's how I was called. Somos los primeros que sufrimos de esta pandemia, de este, ni siquiera del mercado legal de las armas. Este pasa a ser una especie de mercado negro de las armas, que no le conviene a nadie, ni siquiera a los fabricantes de armas y ni siquiera al negocio de las armas como tal. Entonces es imperativo que los hispanos levantemos nuestra voz, tengamos dignidad, tengamos self-esteem y promovamos y por supuesto apoyemos esta iniciativa que tú gentilmente has puesto a la disposición de nosotros. So we are with you all the way, you know that, and thank you for bringing us to this level of discussion where our voice can be listened.
Thank you so much, Manny. Katie, I'll hand it to you now.
Yes. All right. So anybody on the line, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask it in the chat. I see that Alex has a question. Let me see if I can unmute you, Alex. Alex, are you on?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, so I have a question for the Congresswoman and maybe for Kris as well on the actual legislation here. So I know like background checks or things that could be part of a background check are, you know, standards that a gun dealer or someone selling a gun can use to determine whether or not that gun can be sold legally. I'm curious, in this case, I know your bill establishes a training program, but you mentioned at the top that it would prevent gun dealers from making a sale to someone that they know is going to be using it to make a straw purchase. I'm just curious if there's any standard there for a gun dealer that might be a little different than a background check, and weighing that against, you know, that the potential subjective concerns of, you know, someone walking into a dealer and, you know, a gun owner saying, well, you know, I think you may make a straw purchase, therefore I'm not going to sell it to you. Or is there any kind of, you know, standard that must be applied for a gun dealer to be able to say, hey, I'm not going to sell this to you because you meet X requirement that makes me think that you're going to use this for an illegal purpose?
So that's a very good question, Alex, and that's something that we will need to include in the bill because we've been having discussions about that. We don't want anyone also being denied the purchase of a weapon because of underlying bias due to race, for example. So one of the things that we're discussing is making sure that there's a standard of training to train gun dealers and also their employees to look into underlying racial bias, right? Because you're absolutely correct. You also don't want to give absolute power to a gun dealer saying, well, you know, I don't like you, so I'm not going to sell you a firearm. This is specifically geared towards people that seem to be intoxicated, that seem to be purchasing a weapon as a straw purchase to give it to someone else. So using their training to make that judgment, will amend this before it moves. And Kris, if you want to comment on that as well.
Congresswoman, I think you answered that very well. I would just add or amplify a few points. One is right now there is no federal standard saying what gun dealers and their employees are supposed to be looking for as indicia that there's an illegal purchase. The way that the law works right now, it relies on organizations like Brady to bring cases after the fact, after someone has been injured or killed with a gun that was illegally sold. And the evidence that we produce basically proves gross negligence under law. It's a tort law violation. What this bill says is, let's put that standard right up front, because we think preserving human life is more important than completing a sale to someone who may be at risk of harming themselves or others. And the standard that the Congresswoman has chosen here is a high standard under law. And that is that the dealer should have known or have reason to know that an illegal purchase is happening. And let me just give you an example of the kinds of things that we have to show in court with nausea when we go to prove that there was a straw purchase. Someone walking in, making repeated phone calls, going to the area where the gun is, calling again, confirming, yes, that's the gun you want, and then completing the purchase, okay? So there isn't a lot of vagueness about what needs to be done in those circumstances, and certainly from a legal perspective, and not to nerd out here, any lawyer could tell you that a knowing standard is a high standard, and that is what she has chosen here, and we're comfortable with that because it's backed up with training that's going to be provided to help those employees and the dealers understand what these kinds of purchases look like. and they all look more or less alike. We just have to make sure that the employees on the front guards of protecting our safety can identify it, and we're confident that they can.
Thank you, Kris.
Thank you, Kris. And I'm not seeing any more questions, so Congresswoman, I'm going to go ahead and let you close us out.
Okay, if no one has any more questions, and I'll see if anybody else here in the panel has anything else to add. One of the things that I think we many times leave out of the conversation, and Kris, I've had a lot of conversations with the Brady team about this, is that a lot of these laws that we're trying and pushing to implement at the federal level, it's not only going to prevent more lives from being lost due to this epidemic of gun violence in America, but it makes our communities safer, and it also makes law enforcement safer. Believe me when I tell you that police officers all over America know that this is happening, and it puts them in danger because you're allowing people with either criminal backgrounds, violent backgrounds, to purchase a gun directly, because we still do not have this very thorough universal background check implemented, which we passed over a year ago. But it also allows for people to go and purchase a weapon for minors. If you're under the age of 18 and you are paying someone to get you a gun, this puts our law enforcement officers also in danger. So it's also for their safety. And I think that needs to be, it needs to be a point that needs to be lifted and heightened, because I do have a lot of those conversations with our law enforcement officers as well. So it's for our families, it's for our communities, it's for our kids, and it's for our law enforcement officers. I just want to say thank you. It's a bill that we are going to be pushing very hard. We already have several co-sponsors. I will be talking to the chairman at the Judiciary Committee to make sure that we include it in the next markup of gun violence bills. My dear friend Lucy McBath will be supporting this bill as well. And I just want to thank all of you for joining me, and Kris for all your guidance as we got this bill together. If anyone has any comments or questions, this is your time. We have a few minutes.
I'll just add one thing. I think that it's been such a pleasure to work with you on an issue that's so critically important to all American safety. I want to echo something Manny said, because I think it's a really, really important point. You know, when we're talking about these crime guns, based on data that we have, it's admittedly old because the ATF hasn't given us new data, but the older data that we have shows that about 5% of gun dealers are responsible for the sale of 90% of crime guns. What does that imply? That implies we have some gun dealers who are really falling down on the job and/or flagrantly violating the law. The opposite also is true, though, which is that the vast majority of gun dealers are doing the right thing. And if you think about it simply as a market, right, then what benefits responsible gun dealers is an enforcement system and a training program that ensures everyone operates with the same level playing field. And I think that's a really important point that Manny is making. We want gun dealers to succeed in their job. We acknowledge it's critically important. It's important too, because what you're saying is right, Congresswoman. Among the 30 years of cases that we've brought, a huge percentage of those victims are law enforcement officers. They're often the ones who are also being shot with crime guns. So this is a public safety issue, and it is lifting up a baseline of responsible gun dealership across this country, which we think is really important. And thank you again for your leadership and for the incredible other panelists who are here with us to support you.
If I could, and I'm so thankful you brought law enforcement into this conversation, because again, we're kind of going through a really weird time where the current occupant of the White House is trying to divide Americans on lines of law enforcement. anyone who has followed my story knows I have a deep affection for all first responders, to include law enforcement, and consider among some of my very best friends law enforcement. For example, the one who actually identified my daughter the day she was killed and who ran in unprotected to try and save lives. Law enforcement, right now, we're putting them in a position where they also understand the reality of guns on the streets. They also understand the reality that they may not go home to their families. They understand the reality that they don't know anymore 400 million weapons. And like you said, being distributed in ways that we can't always legally account for. They understand that reality. And so when they're trying to defend us and themselves, we have an obligation to do everything possible to make sure they are protected as well. And so these laws are to protect us, to protect law enforcement. The greatest thing that we could do to protect law enforcement and us and to tamp down the temperature would be to pass gun safety measures.
I agree. Manny, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I gotta get used to this new way of communicating. I just want to add a graphic sample of what's going on in here. Imagine your 17-year-old kid or ex-17-year-old outside of a gas station, convenience store, waiting for an adult, an irresponsible adult, to get inside and buy a package of cigarettes to him, or a six-pack with beer. That happens all day long. You will be very offended, and you will go to that gas station and talk to the guy in charge and let him know what happened, and then probably call the police. Probably you could sue them and make that a really big deal. Well, this is an exponential way of that same picture that I just described you. A 17-year-old, someone that is not able, it shouldn't be able to carry a gun, waiting outside just for someone irresponsible enough to buy it for him or for her. So these graphic ways of seeing things probably help you understand that we should all be on board for this one.
Yeah. Thank you, Manny. I will bring those words in September to my colleagues from the other side, explaining to them how important it is just to keep everyone safe. And it's a common sense to ask federally licensed gun dealers to go through a training process to identify those people that are trying to purchase guns to commit crimes. And with that, I thank you again, and let's keep working. I know that together we're going to be able to bring some common sense to these laws to protect our communities. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.